Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be debunking Wess Huff. Wess Huff is a Christian apologist who specializes in biblical manuscripts and also theology. Now, he made a video called Comparing the Qur'an and the New Testament by Wess Huff, right? In this video, he's dragging it. Let's just say, let's put it simply, he is dragging it. He's trying to compare the Bible to the Quran, which, if he did it in an academic perspective, I would have had no issues. There's plenty of videos, academically that talk about this stuff, which is, they're good watch. But Wess Huff, he can't help himself, he just can't. He tries to present himself in this video as someone who is just trying to approach this, as a discussion between Christians and Muslims. But it's clearly obvious that he is extremely biased. Obviously, his effort, you can just see through it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through his video, we're going to watch it, and we're going to dissect his claims, right? Now, it's a 46 video, so if you think I'm going to sit down and watch the whole thing with you guys are crazy. He makes a lot of claims. Some are false, some are accurate. So I'm going to focus on the main ones, like the big claims that he's trying to make, and we're going to dissect it. So there's going to be two sections, the biblical section and also the Quranic section in the video, and I'll try to put timestamps so you can guys go through it and through the arguments.
Now, for the New Testament in particular, we have 6,000 handwritten copies of the Greek New Testament, which is the original language that it was written in. That's everything from the 2nd to the 17th century. I closed it off at the 17th century because that's when you have the invention of the printing press. And so we do have copies after that, but I closed it off there because our handwritten copies drastically take a downward spiral because they're printing them from that point on. If you include the Latin, you have 10,000 Latin copies, and then if you include all the other ancient translations in language like Coptic and Georgian and Old Church Slavonic and Syriac and Ethiopic and Latin, words you can forget as soon as you hear them, that number comes out to 24,000 handwritten manuscripts. So you have a lot of data for the biblical New Testament. Now, like I said before, anything that's handwritten has mistakes. 24,000, that's a pretty big number. Well, that's going to result in a lot of mistakes, right? So how many mistakes? How many variants? How many errors? Well, we have approximately 140,000 words in the Greek New Testament. Now, if we have 140,000 words, how many differences within the manuscript tradition do you think we have? Well, actually, the number is between 400 and 600,000. So that seems like bad news right off the bat, right? That doesn't seem like a good situation. We have 3 variants per words. But remember what I was saying before, in the sense that the vast majority of these copyist errors are easy to pinpoint. Let me give you an example of one of the most common. It's called the movable nu. Now, nu.
Okay, interesting. So again, as I said, he does mix some truth that he did mention is like, okay, we've got different kind of biblical manuscripts. We've got Latin, we've got Greek, and so on and so on. We've got Syriac, which I have no issue with that. I have no issue with any of that. But this is where the issue comes in. So he mentions that there is 140,000 words in the Greek manuscript. Then he follows it up by saying there is about between 400,000 to 600,000 variants. Now, this is true. This is fact. Some say it's 200,000, some say it's 300,000 variants, some say it's 400,000. So no issues there. But this is what he's trying to do, right? You can watch the video yourself. I'm not trying to strawman his argument, but essentially what he's trying to do is he's trying to wish-wash it, right? He's trying to whitewash everything. He's trying to downplay it, underestimate all these, these variations. And he's trying to make it look, he's trying to say, like, look, check me out. All these variants, right? They're only scribal errors. And he continues to explain different scribal errors, right? Now, what he doesn't do there, all right, he doesn't go and he doesn't show you guys the big variants, right? He doesn't show the intentional editing, the intentional fabrications in the Gospels, right? Firstly, there is clear evidence of these variants. So, because how do we know this? We do not find them in the oldest and most reliable manuscripts. And then I've got evidence. I'll show you our evidence today. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to a book by Bart Ehrman. It's called Misquoting Jesus. Now, there is other books that delve into this topic as well, but I chose this book for my purposes. Now, that said, Bart Ehrman used to be a Christian who left Christianity, and now he's an agnostic from my understanding. So again, in page 94 in Misquoting Jesus, right, so he does, like, it's a long read, so if you want to purchase the book or like download the PDF, you can do that online. Now I'm just going to go straight to the examples he gave. So sometimes scribes change their text because they thought the text contained a factual error. This appears to be the case at the very beginning of Mark, where the author introduces his gospel by saying, "Just as is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I am sending a messenger before your face. Make straight his path." The problem is that the beginning of the quotation is not from Isaiah at all, but represents a combination of a passage from Exodus and one from, now I'm pretty sure this is Malak. I could be absolutely wrong, don't quote me here. Chapter 3, verse 1. Scribes recognized that this was a difficulty and so changed the text, making it say, "Just as is written in the prophets." Okay, beautiful. So this is the first example, right? Like, there is plenty of examples. I'm going to give way more examples than this, but I just want to make it clear, right? So we're talking about a book from God, right? We're talking about a book that is meant to be, a revelation from God, that is or revelation that is inspired to the apostles of God, right? When you've got scribes changing what they don't like or what they think is errors, I would call that fabrication. And how do we know this? Because this verse in particular, well, the example I just gave, it's not in our oldest manuscripts. We know for a fact, all right, this was not in the oldest manuscripts. So he's trying to downplay these evidences, right, and say, you know what, it's just scribal errors, mate. Okay, Wes, buddy, my brother, stop playing. Like, you studied the manuscript, this is not true. Now we will get into his other claims, right, because he makes other claims trying to downplay it, but let's continue with the example. On occasion, the error that the scribes attempted to correct was not factual, but interpretive. A well-known example is in Matthew chapter 24, verse 36, where Jesus is predicting the end of the age and says that concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not the angels in heaven, nor even the Son, but only the Father. Scribes found this passage difficult. The Son of God, Jesus himself, do not know when the end will come. How could that be? Isn't he all-knowing? To resolve the problem, some scribes simply modified the text by taking out the words, "nor even the Son." Now, the angels may be ignorant, but the Son of God isn't. Okay, another example, right? This is a theological problem. So imagine in the Quran, right? Like, let's give an example. Like, let's say, because Muslims, we don't believe that no one knows the hour other than Allah. So let's say in the Quran, for example, we have a theological belief that, okay, only God knows the hour. So let's say in the Quran it says Muhammad knows the hour. So a Muslim comes in, right, and removes that part and then just writes only God knows the hour, right? Hypothetically, we'll just say hypothetically. And then Christians come and find the Sana'a manuscript, or the Birmingham manuscript, and then they discover, wait, hold on, in the Quran it actually says that Muhammad knows the hour, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let's be honest here. You guys would not let it slide. So let's not act lenient, all right? Let's not act like, okay, this is not clear fabrications, this is not clear editing of the book of the Gospels, right, which you guys call the book of God. Well, not the Gospel of Jesus, but the Gospel of God. In other cases, scribes changed the text not because they thought that it contained a mistake, but because they wanted to circumvent a misunderstanding of it. An example is Matthew chapter 17, verse 12 to 13, in which Jesus identifies John the Baptist as Elijah, the prophet to come at the end of time. I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him as much as they wished. Thus also the Son of Man is about to suffer by them. Then this disciple realized that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. The potential problem is that, as it reads, the text could be interpreted to mean not that John the Baptist was Elijah, but that he was the Son of Man. Scribes knew full well this was not the case, and so some of them switched the text around, making the statement, his disciple realized that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist before the statement about the Son of Man. So again, I'm going to continue to give more examples, and then we delve into it later. Sometimes scribes change their text for more patently theological reasons, to make sure that the text could not be used by heretics, or to ensure that it said what it was already supposed by the scribes to mean. There were numerous instances of this kind of changes, which we will consider at greater length in a later chapter. For now, I will simply point out a couple of brief examples. In the 2nd century, there were Christians who firmly believed that the salvation brought by Christ. Okay, so I'm just gonna, because I already read this, I'm just gonna explain what this is trying to say. So essentially, in this example, right, he talks about like Christians believe that they are, that their religion is superior to Judaism, that when Jesus came, that the laws, they don't need to affirm the laws as to Paul, and that's it, the religion is superior essentially, right? So there's a verse, right, in the Bible that says, "No one places a new wine in old wineskins, but new wine must be placed in new wineskins. And no one who drinks the old wine wishes for the new, for they say the old is better." How could Jesus indicate that the old is better than the new? Isn't the salvation he brings superior to anything Judaism? So essentially, they changed it. They removed the part where it says the old is better. Right? So I'll be honest with you, this is pathetic, right? Even small things like that they will remove, all right? Like it's not even necessarily a problem, but anything that they felt like, okay, this could cause a problem, or some heretic, the Muslims, right? Could come in, take this and use it against them, so they would remove it. You would never catch a Muslim do such a thing. This is like we believe the Quran is the word of God, right? What was given to us is what we get, and that's it. We're not gonna go and change what we like. The Christians might say this, so we're gonna remove it. We accept it as it is. Okay, cool, and by the way, he's trying to make it seem like it's not a big issue. My dude, you guys have more variants than you guys have words in the Greek manuscripts. That's crazy. That is crazy. Imagine having more variants than the amount of words in the New Testaments. That's wild to me. But let's continue the video. Let's continue and see what else he says.
Christians were very eager to get the message of the gospel out, the message of Jesus Christ. And so they didn't ask for your specific qualifications. And what this resulted in was that copies spread throughout all the ancient world at the time. And so you had copies in North Africa and in the Middle East, up into Europe, into the British Isles, and into Asia rather, very, very early on within the first few centuries. When this resulted in the fact that no one person or group could have ever controlled the text at any one point in time, because there were copies of these documents buried in the sands of North Africa that someone, say in Greece, they wanted to, insert something into the text, or they wanted to start editing it or add doctrines or whatever, that would have been effectively impossible, because Christians in North Africa would have disagreed, and there would have been copies that would have been lost that we've actually found now, almost 2 millennia later, that would have revealed that these earlier copies said different things. And what this is called is a free transmission. The New Testament is a text.
Okay, so essentially he's trying to say, right, between the 1st to the 4th century, right, the Christians were very eager to spread the message of the Gospels, right? So what happens is you've got, people preaching everywhere, you've got different manuscripts in different areas, like South Africa, Greece, Asia, and so on and so forth. If someone attempted to edit the verses or add something to it, right, people would have found out, they would have found out, and they would have disagreed. Look, I'm not trying to strawman his argument. Again, let me know in the comments if I misunderstood what he said, but he's essentially trying to say, like, the more manuscripts that you have, the more verifiable it is, right? The more evidence you have for the original. Now, let's see what Bar Irma says about that. Let's get into it. So in page 152 in Misquoting Jesus, we've got the theological context of the transmission of the text. We know a good deal about Christianity during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the time set between the completion of the writing of the New Testament books and the conversion of the Roman Emperor Constantine to the religion, which as we have seen, changed everything. These 2 centuries were particularly rich in theological diversity. Among the early Christians, in fact, the theological diversity was so extensive that groups calling themselves Christian adhered to beliefs and practices that most Christians today would insist were not Christian at all. In the 2nd and 3rd century, there were, of course, Christians who believed that there was only one God, the creator of all there is. Other peoples who called themselves Christians, however, insisted that there were 2 different gods, one of the Old Testament, a God of wrath, and one of the New Testament, a God of love and mercy. They were not simply 2 different facets of the same God. They were actually 2 different gods. Strikingly, the groups that made these claims, including the followers of Marcion, whom we have already met, insisted that their view were the true teaching of Jesus and his apostles. Other groups, for example, Gnostic Christian, insisted that there were not just 2 gods, but 12 gods, ladies and gentlemen. This is interesting. It's getting better. Others said 30. And others still said 365 God. That's nice. So we got a God for each day. This is fantastic. So every day you pray to another God. That's fantastic. All these groups claimed to be Christian, insisting that their view were true and had been taught by Jesus and his followers. Why didn't these other groups simply read their New Testaments to see that their views were wrong? It is because there was no New Testament. To be sure, all the books of the New Testament had been written by this time, but there were a lot of other books as well, also claiming to be Jesus' own apostle. Other gospel, Acts, and apocalypses having very different perspectives from those found in the books that eventually came to be called the New Testament. The New Testament itself emerged out of these conflicts over God or the gods, as one group of believers acquired more converts than all others and decided which books should be included in the canon of the scripture during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. However, there were no agreed upon canon and no agreed upon theology. Instead, there was a wide range of diversity, diverse groups asserting diverse theologies based on diverse written texts, all claiming to be written by apostle of Jesus. But this just debunks, his existence, right? Like so he was trying to claim like, all right, check me out. Because we have, diverse manuscript. I don't want to use the word diverse, but since we have all these manuscripts, right, that are in different areas, in different places, that are written by different people to different audiences, right? And that now, in the 20th century, we can look and we have discovered many of the oldest manuscripts, right? And we can, confirm which are true, which are not. But the issue is, my friend, is that would work, right, if there was only one theology, if there was only one Christianity. But it is clear historically that Christianity was diverse, that there was different sects, different people, believed different things. You had people like the boys, I call them, who actually believe that there is only one God and Jesus is the prophet of God. For me, these are the boys, the originals, right? And then you had people who believed in, like, I don't want to say the Trinity, but like they believed in like there's more gods, there's 2 gods, there's 365 gods. Like how do you get 365? That is crazy to me. But essentially, this just proves that his hypothesis or his claim, right, that the free transmission is a reliable source. It's not. You've got over 600 different variants. I'll give you that. Let's say 99% are scribal variants, right? But you do have clear theological variants. You've got errors, you've got contradictions, you've got pure manipulation, editing, right? So he's trying to whitewash it and make it sound like, okay, it's cool, guys, relax, it's just scribes do scribe things, but that is not true, and he's being dishonest.
This also exemplifies what scholars call multifocality. So just think of many focality locations. So it's often asserted that, the Bible is something like a telephone game. I whisper into your ear and you whisper into the next person, and we go down the line till at the end when the person repeats the phrase that I originally whispered, it's all messed up. Well, that's a single line of transmission. And there are rules to it, right? I'm only allowed to whisper in one person's ear, and so is the person after me, and everybody's only allowed to whisper. And so what this does is it is designed to corrupt the text. But when we look at the history of the New Testament, we see that it was written by multiple authors at multiple times in multiple places by multiple individuals to multiple audiences. And then those are copied at multiple times in multiple places by multiple copyists in multiple locations to multiple audiences. This is levels of multifocality. And as a result, we can look forward to finding even earlier.
Okay, so as I was saying, he's saying multiple times, like time periods to multiple people, multiple authors to multiple audiences, right? And multiple locations. Again, my brother Wesley, this is not evidence, right? This is actually evidence of corruptions, as we proven, right? Like, okay, there might be a case where this could work. I doubt it. Even you just explaining it sounds dodgy, bro, this is the book of God. You're claiming this is, revelation from God, or like inspired words of God, right? Whatever. That's not how the inspired word of God should be presented, like if you have a book that is claiming to be from God, you would assume that God would make it easy, right? He would make the revelation easy. He would make it not corrupted, not 100 authors, but one author. Like, you want one author, you don't want 100 authors, you don't want 10 authors, right? Because then how do you know which one is true? Like, if there's 10 why do you need 10 different authors that would say exactly the same thing? The only time you have 10 different authors, right, it's like, come on, brother, like, what are we doing? Multifocality, more like multi-manipulation, all right? Okay.
Copies. Earlier manuscripts of the New Testament documents, as the free transmission of the text has provided us with a solid basis for asserting that we continue to possess the original readings of the authors themselves. Now, what's moving on the screen is PC.
I had to stop it real quick because the bullshit that was just coming out of his mouth was, the nonsense. So he's using a papyrus. I don't know if it's Papyrus 52 or another papyrus. It's from John, right? It's one of the oldest manuscripts that we have. It's the size of a credit card, and he's trying to say, like, yo, because we've got this small credit card sized manuscript, he's saying, like, yo, like, here you go, this is a verification. We can use this to verify that we have the original text, right? No, my friend, you need more than, like, you need the whole book, all right? We need the whole book. Ideally you want the whole book, and if not the whole book, at least half. The oldest complete manuscript you guys have, from my understanding, I could be wrong, is 200 to 300 years after Jesus. So that's the oldest, the oldest one you guys have that is a full manuscript. And even then, even that manuscript, right, has like proven that, if we look into it, we can see that there's a lot of stuff that is not there, like, the story of the adulteress, or the, Mark, right? Is it the ending of Mark, if I'm correct? My brain is foggy, right? Or the other examples that we gave earlier in the video. So again, just because you have a papyrus that is like, barely a page, that is not evidence of tenacity, all right? So, I would argue, okay, if you had the whole manuscript going in the 1st century, or 50 pages, or like, half, not 50 pages, like at least half of the manuscript, I'll be like, okay, you have a case of tenacity, but you don't. So let's not sugarcoat it, Wess Huff. I'm sorry, but you are, like, you're whitewashing, you're undermining all the evidence, and you're trying to make it seem like you guys have a reliable manuscript, but you guys don't, and it's the truth, and I think earlier on in the video, he says like, oh yeah, majority of scholars, no, majority of scholars do not agree. I don't know where you got that statement. Like, if you're gonna make a statement like that, we need evidence, who's these scholars, who's these majority that you talk of? Because from my understanding, the majority of scholars do not agree.
Now, if you opened up a box of a 100,000 piece puzzle, would it be more annoying if you opened it up and counted 99,900 pieces, meaning you were missing 100, or whether you counted 100,100 pieces, meaning you had, 100 more? Well, it might seem more annoying if you have more, but in reality, once you start to put the pieces together and you assemble the puzzle, you can see the image that's supposed to be there. You can see where there are pieces that don't belong. They're from other puzzles. You can see where, maybe your younger sibling has come in. They've tried to smash a piece in here where it doesn't belong. Or there are duplicates of pieces. Once you start to put the puzzle together, it's really easy to see, because of the amount of pieces, what things belong and what things don't. And I would argue this is what we have with the Bible, with the New Testament in particular.
Okay, so you're saying if you have what's it called, like a puzzle piece, if you have 100,000, like if you have which one would you rather be, like have 99,900, you don't have the enough pieces, or would you rather have more, and then that way you can figure out which belongs, which one doesn't belong, right? If your revelation is from God, you don't want it to be a puzzle game, right? You want it to be straightforward. You want it to be clear, right? You want it to be one book, one theology, one understanding, right? That's what you want your religion to be. You don't want a puzzle game where like it takes literally 2,000 years until you can figure out the puzzle, right? Because this is what he's claiming. He's not, because it's clear. Early Christians had no clue which isn't from God, right? There was diverse Christians. You have different manuscripts saying different things, like even today, you've got Catholics have 66, Protestants have like 88. I could be wrong. I don't know the exact numbers, but even today we don't agree on the canon. Like the Christians don't agree on the canon. So I don't know, he's trying to make it out to be like, okay, we figure out the puzzle. No one has figured out shit. Like I apologize to say, you gotta be honest with yourself, Revelation should be straight. There should be no puzzle. Definitely not a puzzle that takes 2,000 years to figure out.
I'm calling textual tenacity. I'm highlighting what's called textual tenacity in the academic field. And all of these things, all of these factors, all of these methodologies give us confidence in being able to, trace something like the New Testament back to the original author.
Okay, all right. He said it gives us confidence that we can trace it to the original author. My friend, you guys don't even know who the original authors are. We don't know who wrote Matthew. We don't know who wrote Luke, right? We don't even know if that's their real names, right? The earliest person, from my understanding, is, I forgot his name, but I think he comes in 170. So it's not even in the first century, right? We don't know who, like that's the truth. We don't know who's the authors, right? We don't know how the original manuscript looked like, right? We only have, fragments here, fragments there, right? Your free transmission hypothesis, or like, it's not working out, mate, I understand you'd argue it's not a hypothesis, it's based on evidence. You'd say like other scholars would agree about this free transmission being more reliable. I would argue that you're full of shit, but that's just my opinion. Textual multifocality is, I don't know. Like, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'll let you guys decide. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that I'm being a bit delusional? Leave a comment on what you guys thought about this video so far. If you agree with me, if you don't agree with me, if you're a Christian, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but he's being dishonest, and I just don't like how dishonest he's being. He's trying to make it sound like this is like a consensus by Christian scholars, which I absolutely disagree with. The consensus is that, we do not know who wrote the Gospels. We don't know how even the original Gospels, the original New Testament look like. We don't even agree on the canon today.
We can see the spider web, and we can trace all of the lines back to the original. And in one sense, it's a little bit unfair what I'm doing to compare the Bible to the Qur'an, because the Bible is 66 books written over a period of 1,600 years on 3 different continents by 40 different authors in 3 different languages. The major languages are obviously Greek and Hebrew for the New Testament and Old Testament. There are about 13 chapters, particularly in the Old Testament, that are in Aramaic, whereas the Qur'an was revealed and then codified within a period of 25 years as one book, in one location, the Arabian Peninsula, by one author. The Muslim will obviously argue that the author is God, but I'm going to go with the argument that the traditional Hadith having Muhammad as the author, at least in a very naturalistic way. Although I understand the argument from the Muslim who say that Muhammad was not the author, he was just the mouthpiece of God. And we have an argument from the Quran itself of preservation, right?
His final comparison, I don't know if you guys caught that, but he was trying to be like really sneaky about it as well. He's trying to say, like, let's go back there for a second. He's trying to say, okay, you know, the Bible is, you know, 66 books, which, you know, that's like we can even do the argument just there. We haven't even started, you know, like, how do you know if it's 66 books, you know, like, processes thinks it's more, right? Like, I don't know, like, he's putting his own theology there, right, there, in that statement. But anyways, he's saying 66 books over 1,600 years across 3 different continents by over 40 authors in 3 different languages, right? And he tried to be sneaky about it. He's like, it's not fair what I'm doing because it's like obviously like great multifocality we've got here compared to the Quran, you know? And then he compares it to the Quran, you know, which is 1 book over 25 years, 1 location, 1 author, and 1 language. I don't even know, like, just there, my friend, like, that should be enough evidence that you're cooked, you know? Like, when you get a revelation that is 1 book, you know, that has been in a codified in, like, not codified, you know, but like we had like the complete manuscript like over 25 years or like within the time of the prophet, right, in 1 location by 1 author and in 1 language, right? That is clear evidence of reliability, right? Like, that is a more reliable book than having 40 different authors. But I guess that is evidence, you know, why you guys have so much different diversity, like, you know. But yeah, okay, so that's the you know, the Christian section. We're gonna get to the Quranic section. This is where he gets to the preservation of the Quran. What he does, and let me play the video for you guys.
Mazhar Qazi, who says Muslims and non-Muslims both agree that no change has ever occurred in the text of the Quran. The above prophecy of eternal preservation and purity of the Quran came true not only for the text of the Quran, but also for the most minute details of its punctuation marks as well. It is a miracle of the Quran that no change has occurred in a single word or a single letter of the alphabet, a single punctuation mark, or a single diacritical mark in the text of the Quran during the last 14 centuries. Now, with all due respect to my Muslim friends, what Qazi is saying here is just incorrect. It's a common...
Okay, fantastic. So, what did he do here? You guys might have, it's a very, very sneaky thing he actually did. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but he actually committed the strawman fallacy, right? Now, you're going to be like, how did he commit the strawman fallacy? And I'll explain to you guys now. So, firstly, when he was in the biblical section, you know, when he was talking about the Bible, the preservation, and he's claiming that he's going to use the same standards, right, for, you know, I think there's a quote he makes in the end of the video where he said, the same standards that are used to to prove the Bible debunks the Quran, right? But is he really using the same standards, right? So this is where he commits the fallacy, right? So imagine he asked himself a question. In the Bible section, he asked himself the question, is the Bible preserved, right? Now, instead of asking the same question for the Quran, is the Quran preserved? What he did, he grabbed a quote from Mazhar Qazi, who says that the Quran is preserved word for word, letter for letter, dot for dot. So instead, what he's asking in the Quran section, is the Quran preserved word for word, letter for letter, dot for dot? And this is a very important distinction. Now, if someone makes a claim that the Quran, like the Quran or the Bible, is preserved word for word, dot for dot, you know, that is an easier claim to debunk. But if someone makes a claim that the Quran is preserved or the Bible is preserved, that is a harder claim to debunk. So what he's doing, he grabbed an exaggerated version of the argument, of the claim, so it's easier for him to debunk, which is a textbook strawman fallacy. The question is, do Muslims believe that? And there's 2 answers to this. Yes and no. The layman Muslim does believe this. The second people which are the scholars, you know, what do the scholars of Islam say? What do the classical sources tell us, you know? So, firstly, we've got a hadith that talk about variation. We have a hadith about Qirā'āt, you know, we have documented variations in the Quran. So I'll give you an example, right? So how many variation readings of campaigns are there that differ from the Ottomanic Codex? Many who write on this subject how many variation reading of campaigns are there that differ from the Ottomanic Codex? By the way, this is the Yaqeen Institute, I'm pretty sure. Many who write on this subject simply cite a few instances of variation without giving any sense of proportion or frequency. A systematic study requires evaluating all transmitted material in a comprehensive study of the primary sources undertaken by Muhammad Abdul Rahman At-Tassan. The author notes a total of 592 instances where a companion's reading of verses has been narrated. Of these narrations, 52 are identical to the Ottomanic Codex, while the remaining 540 are variant reading which differ from the Ottomanic Codex, thus termed shadha. However, of those 540 instances, only 177 are found with a chain of transmission, isnad. And of those with a chain, only 20 are classified as authentic by Hadith standards. The actual quantity of variant traceable to the companion is significantly smaller than may initially be supposed. So that's number one. And also, I'll show you a video from Muhammad Hijab, which is a respected Muslim apologist.
Sometimes you have manuscripts that are not Uthmanic and that have different kind of words in them, word order. And the question is, can they sometimes be different? I mean, this is an important question. This is a very important question. The answer is yes. For someone to argue, a Muslim to argue, that no, all of the manuscripts are the same, this is a foolish argument, with all due respect. And by the way, not only is it a foolish argument, it's not even an Islamic argument or one that we need to defend. And this shows you the weakness. And I have to say, it's not our fault. It's not the fault of the Orientalists and the disbelievers and the David Woods and the J. Smiths. It's not their fault. It's our fault that we don't look into our own tradition and realize what it's actually saying. The question is, number two question, very important. Are there differences outside of the Uthmanic text? Answer is, what am I saying? Yes, there are.
Okay, fantastic. So, as I was saying, right, so not only, right, that this is not an argument that we have to do. We don't really have to defend it. It's not in our tradition, our tradition does not make this claim, just because some Muslims make this claim, even if they're scholars, even if they're sheikhs, right, just because some scholars, cherry picked scholars that you choose, right, make this claim doesn't make it the same claim. Right? It doesn't mean a claim that we have to defend in the first place. Before I continue, which I will show you guys, right? Before I show you guys this video about a manuscript expert, a biblical manuscript expert on what he says on this matter, I just want to make something clear, right? Regardless of whether Muslims say this or not, right? He still did not ask the question, is the Quran preserved? He chose an exaggerated version of the argument, right? You feel me? So, he's being dishonest. He's not using the same standard that he used for the Bible for the Quran, right? Because the truth is the Quran is preserved, and it is way more preserved. It is the dream of the Christians to have a book preserved, for their Bible to be preserved like the Quran. But don't take my word for it. Take this guy's word for it. So this is actually a video from Alex Connor, who is an atheist, right? And I gotta say, it's actually a really good video. It debunks Wess Huff, right? It has nothing to do with Islam in this video. It's about his his interview in Joe Rogan. I just wanted to show you guys this part, which is actually relevant to our discussion.
Would be exactly the same. It is a wow moment.
Isn't it still just amazing and unheard of for an ancient text to be so well preserved?
But here's the thing. There's nothing special about 1Q Isaiah A or any biblical manuscripts in terms of their fidelity or how close they are to later copies of the Old Testament. You could do the same thing with manuscripts of pretty much anything from antiquity. So why are we so shocked and so excited when when biblical manuscripts basically just look like all other ancient manuscripts?
That's why, by the way, it would be amazing if the Isaiah scroll was different from other texts in being actually word for word with no variants.
Yeah, and if you want something that approaches that kind of textual fidelity, we have manuscripts for that too. They just all happen to be manuscripts of the Qur'an. Now, there are reasons why that is the case that are not miraculous either. It's just the nature of how the Qumran was transmitted and preserved, which is quite different. The circumstances behind that are quite different from anything in the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament or the Greco-Roman world. But that's where those manuscripts are.
So as you guys heard, if you want to talk about a manuscript that is, I'm not going to make a claim that this is the only manuscript that is preserved to this level. I don't want to make this claim. That's a whole nother claim. But as you can see, right, he debunks his claim, that, they're talking about Isaiah Q2, I think, regardless of the fact that he even says, like, if we're going to talk about manuscripts from antiquity that have been well preserved on that level, right, they happen all to be the Quran, right? So it goes, I guess we're not making the claim that it's word for word preserved, but, if you want something that is close to that level, it's going to be the Quran, right? You're not going to try to bring the Bible against the Quran. It's just a whole nother level. Now, I showed the whole video. Now, he does say that it's because of the circumstance and so on and so forth. Fair enough, but yeah, moving on. So let's continue.
Old manuscripts of the Quran, right? So in 1972, the Sa'ana palimpsest was discovered in Sa'ana, Yemen. They were doing some updates on the mosque in Yemen there, and they kind of poked a hole in the wall, and these manuscripts fell out. And because of the investigative tools we have, we can do things like expose them to ultraviolet and radiocarbon light, and what that showed was that there was actually, this is what's referred to as a palimpsest. There was original copy of the Quran. It was washed clean, and then a different copy of the Quran was written on top. And we have a different text of the Quran underneath, which is shows variation in scribal accuracy from the copy that's written on top. And we have differences within the Quranic text from the Sa'ana palimpsest. In 2015, the Birmingham Quran was discovered, and likewise, this was showed textual variation within the manuscript tradition of the Quran. The Birmingham Quran is very important because it was a late 7th, early 8th century manuscript, which is very, very early. And it likewise showed textual variation. One of my first grad level papers was on analysis of some of the diacritical marks that differed within the Birmingham Quran. Likewise, not only that, but there are...
Okay, so let's tackle the Sana'a manuscript. Okay, so he brings the Sana'a manuscript and he says that there is like variations, which again, there is no issue that I have no issue with that claim. Obviously it's an old manuscript, arguably from the time of the Prophet, or so on. I have no issue with the claim he just made, right? But I want to show you guys this regardless of the fact. So this is a book from Gabriel Said Reynolds. He's an academic and a historian, and there is a quote from here, or an article from Sadgi, which is his name is Banham Sangi, I think his name is Behnam Sadgi, who is a scholar of Islamic law and history. So let's just read through it real quick, right? In his article, Sadgi similarly analyzed the variant found between the scripture inferior and the scripture superior of the palimpsest. However, his principal concern is to compare both layers with the medieval Islamic tradition on the Mus'haf. Ultimately, he argues that the scripture superior, which Sadgi labels Uthmanic and argues is a reflection of the Prophet's own reading of his manuscript, is more ancient than the scripture inferior, which he attributes to a companion, although it does not match the traditional description of any companion Mus'haf. Thus, Sadgi concludes that the traditional account of the Quran codification is vindicated by his analysis. This conclusion, he explained, was predictable. If anybody had the resources to ensure that a reliable version be chosen, it would be the Caliph, and if anybody had more to lose by botching up the task, again, it would have been Uthman. So even with the Sana'a manuscript, I just wanted to show that this part. I just want to make it clear. The Sana'a manuscript, right? He used this as an evidence, right? This is evidence for us. It's not evidence for you, right? Wess Huff. Let me explain that to you. This is evidence to prove the Muslim narrative that we had for so long, you know, right? We had the narrative, you know, that after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, you know, he collected the Mus'haf, he created his own Mus'haf, and then Uthman standardized it, right? This is our narrative, and, you know, not Western scholars did not believe our narrative, you know, like they thought we were lying. And, you know, you've got the revisionist movement, you know, trying to prove that, you know, like this is all nonsense. The Sana'a manuscript is evidence for us to prove our narrative. Now, obviously, again, I know he hasn't made any claims that are, you know, radical. You know, he's just trying to show that there is variation. But again, he's still being dishonest. How many variations are there in the Quran? What, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000? Wherever the number you want to bring, right? It's not going to be enough to take off the credibility of the Quran. You will not find evidence of editing, of contradiction, okay? Of, you know, what's the word that I'm looking for, you know? Editing, contradiction, missing verses, added verses, you know, like you find in the Bible, right? As we have proven previously. So he doesn't want to get into that conversation. He doesn't want to get into the conversation of, you know, which is more preserved, right? He wants to attack, you know, an exaggerated version of the argument because he knows. And look, he's a manuscript expert of biblical science, so he knows if he gets into this argument, into this debate, you know, he doesn't have a case, he doesn't have an argument to make. He will get destroyed, not by me. Hey, I'm not even a scholar, like, you know, I'm just doing my research, you know, I'm just trying to prove him wrong, you know, like I'm just doing my research, and this is coming easy, because he's like, he doesn't have an argument to make. Like, defending the Quran against his claim has to be the easiest thing to do. Now, moving on. Oh yeah, so now he gets to halves and wash. My friend, again, right, I forgot about this part. So he gets to halves and wash. There's literally nothing to debunk here, you know. He just says, okay, let's watch the video together and then we'll go from there.
Are actually two different texts of the Quran floating around the world today. 97% of the Muslim world is reading a Hafs Quran, particularly a 1924 Egyptian printing of the Hafs Quran. But I have been to areas of North Africa where the Warsh Quran is being read. And the Warsh Quran, although only 3% of the world reads the Warsh Quran, it differs. It differs from the Hafs Quran. And traditionally throughout Islamic history, there have been differentiations within the copying process of both Warsh and Hafs copies. And so it's incorrect to say there's only one Quran in one sense, because historically there have been a number of iterations and readings and recitations of the Quran. Fred Donner.
Wow, the words he's using, so dishonest. He was like, you could say there's two different kind of Qur'ans. No, who says that? Who? Where's your evidence that there are two different types of Qur'an? Like, I know what he's trying to say, but the way he's wording it is so dishonest. Like, an educated person will know, okay, what he's trying to say, you know? Right? He's, again, just referring to variation. He's not saying this is a different Qur'an, like how, like, King James difference between the, you know, like how Bibles, there's different kind of Bibles. Let's just put it that way, right? That's not what he's saying, you know? But the way he's wording it sounds like that's what he's trying to claim, right? But how much is the differences, ladies and gentlemen? Let's get to it. Like, let's figure out how much is the differences. This is a study by a scholar called Dr. Adrian Brockett, who writes in his PhD thesis, the simple fact is that none of the differences listed in chapter 9 and 10 has any great effect on the meaning. Many are differences with no effect on the meaning at all, and the rest are differences with effects on the meaning of the immediate context, but without any significant wider effect on Muslim thought. Right? This is regarding Hafs and Warsh, from my understanding, and there's other studies that you guys can look into regarding this topic. There is no differences, you know. It's just simple. There's variation in words. There is no like theological variation. There is no contradictions, you know. They do not contradict each other like the Bible does, right? So this is like a sloppy attempt, I would say, from Wess Huff. A weak argument, you know. If he's arguing that there is variation in the Quran, the honest truth is there is variations in the Quran. No one is saying otherwise. And if there is a Muslim that says otherwise, then he needs to go deal with them. You know, he can't go and act like this is a consensus by all Muslims, right? It's a very dishonest, you know, approach from Wess Huff. All right, let's continue the video.
So you have quotes that you find, like Ibn Abu Dawood, who says, Umar was once looking for the test of a specific verse of the Quran. He vaguely remembered. Umar was once looking for a test of a specific verse of the Quran. He vaguely remembered. To his deep sorrow, he discovered that the only person who had any record of that verse had been killed in the Battle of Yamama, and that the verse was consequently lost. That's in Sunan Abu Dawood, Kitab al-Mishhaf. And so that's...
Okay. So he uses a hadith from Sunan Abu Dawood, Kitab al-Masahif. So this is the hadith he's talking about. So Omar was once looking for the text of a specific verse of the Quran. He vaguely remembered to his deep sorrow. He discovered that the only person who had any record of that verse had been killed in the Battle of Yamama, and that verse was consequently lost. Right? So I just want to make clear. So regarding that verse, it is worthwhile mentioning that the narration is munqat. Isn't it munqati? Yeah, no, it is. It is worthwhile mentioning that the narration is munqati, broken chain, which means it is weak. It's a weak hadith. Oh my God, Wess Huff. Oh my God, do your studies, man. Stick with the Bible. What are you doing? He grabs a weak hadith as an argument. Like, do a little bit of research, my brother. Just do a little bit of research, you know. Come on, what are we doing?
Said Ibn Umar, recorded in As-Sayuti, says, let no one of you say that he has acquired the entire Quran, for how does he know that it is all? Much of the Quran has been lost. Thus let him say, I've acquired what is available. Now this is Ibn Umar, who's the son of the second Caliph and the brother of the Prophet Muhammad. And so you have these kind of statements being said because the Quran is oral at this point in time. It's not a written document. It's a memorized document. And so...
Okay. So he says that Ibn Umar, right, before we debunk this hadith, right, you know, I mean, debunk his claim, sorry. He says Ibn Umar is the brother of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What are you talking about? You don't... Nah, that's crazy. So forget even about the hadith. We will get to the hadith, you know, but oh my God, he didn't even... Okay, so I don't even know how he got brother from, you know? Like, it makes no sense. Like, if you've done a little bit of research, Wess Huff, right, you would have found out that that's not the case. But he uses a hadith. Let not one of you say that he has acquired the entire the Quran, for how does he know that it is all? Much of the Quran has been lost, thus let him say, I have acquired what is available. So firstly, this hadith is talking about the abrogated verses, right? So in the Quran, there's abrogated verses that are meant to be there for only a certain period. So firstly, let's look at the translation. Abdullah ibn Umar, let none of you say I've got the whole Quran. How does he know what all of it is? Much of the Quran is gone. Let him say instead, I have got what has survived. Sorry. Not only are the meanings that these critics try to superimpose on this narration is totally wrong, but this translation is also misleading. We shall first clarify the real meaning of this narration and then give it rightful translation supported with due reasoning. The true meaning of the narration. To every ardent student of the Quranic science, it is known that there are many verses first revealed as part of the Quran and later abrogated. As-Sayuti brings this narration in the section of his work titled Section 47 about the abrogating and the abrogated. Likewise, it is in this section about the abrogation in another work of the As-Sayuti. In Abu Ubaid work from which As-Sayuti quotes this, it is the first narration in the chapter titled about what all was abrogated from the Quran after revelation, and is not put in the Mus'haf. Most importantly, the narration quoted from Ibn Hajar, which complements and fixes the meaning of the report we are discussing. Ibn Hajar writes, Ibn ad-Durayz has narrated a report of Ibn Umar that he used to dislike the person who said, I have recited the whole of the Quran. He, Ibn Umar, used to say, but the reality is part of the Quran has been abrogated, right? So this narration is regarding the abrogated verse. Any person who studies Islam is fully aware that there is verses in the Quran that are abrogated, you know. So again, he's being dishonest. He doesn't know what he's talking about, you know. Even like the chapter is called the abrogated, and the chapter is called abrogated verses. So again, this dude has no clue what he's talking about. He's entering a field, dare I say, you know, way above his pay grade. So yeah, you know, you just need to do a little bit of research. But I don't think he really cares about the research when he talks about the Quran. He just wants to make his argument, and I'm going to be honest, it's a very weak argument.
Abu Bakr, who himself recorded in Sahih Bukhari, book 6, says, so I started looking for the Quran and collecting it from what was written on palm stalks, thin white stones, and also from the men who knew it by heart, till I found the last verse of Surat al-Tawbah, repentance, which Abu Khazaimah al-Ansari and I did not find it with anybody other than him. So they're looking for this particular verse in the Quran. They can't find it with anybody except one person who survived at the Battle of Yamama. And so that means that there were verses that were only memorized by one particular individual that were like known in the community, but there was only one person who had it. What's to say that there weren't other verses like that? And so
okay. Alright, so Islamically, when Muslims were, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Muslims started, you know, collecting, what was I going to say? When they were collecting the Mus'haf, right, and when they were collecting the verses of the Quran, right, they had a criteria, you know. So number one, he makes an incorrect, he makes a false claim. Right, he says that, you know, no one knew the verse other than this Sahabi. What was his name? Abu Khazaimah al-Ansari, right? Which is not true. You know, Muslims memorize every single word of every single letter of the Quran. What was referred here is because Muslims, when Abu Bakr, when he wanted to add a verse in the Quran, right, he wanted evidence, right, of that verse. He didn't want to rely only on his memory. So even if he knew the verse, even if he memorized the verse, he wanted a witness, you know, he wanted evidence. He wanted someone that has already written it down. So unless he had the written evidence that the verse is written, you know, he wouldn't want to risk it, right? He don't want to rely on his memory. He don't want to make a mistake, right? Something that Christians don't really do. So again, he makes a false claim. You know, if you learn basic Islamic history, you know this answer. You know, like, it's a weak argument. Honestly, it's a weak argument. He makes a false claim as well. He's like, how do you know if there's no other verses like this? Where's your evidence? Where is your evidence? Wess Huff, where is your evidence? You know, if you're just gonna, he's just making wishy-washy claims at this point. You know, it's pathetic.
There's a later writer, Al-Kindis, in the 9th century, who I think this is a little bit hyperbolic, but this is kind of the narrative of how this happened. Heavy penalty.
Okay. Bro, when I was looking for this quote, I'm actually shocked. The dishonesty of this human being, the lies that Wess Huff was trying to do. So there's two Al-Kindis, right? So there is a Christian Al-Kindi, and there is a Muslim philosopher, mathematician Al-Kindi, right? So I want you guys to look down here. So let's look what he wrote over here, right? Al-Kindi.
These were threatened.
Philosopher and mathematician. Now, the Christian Al-Kindi, he's not a philosopher or a mathematician, right? So I could be wrong. Look, from my research, from what I've gathered, right, only the Muslim Al-Kindi is a philosopher and mathematician. So he's trying to give this quote to the Muslim Al-Kindi, right? Now, this is the interesting thing. This quote is from the Christian Al-Hindi, right? And this took me a long time to find, but here it is. And it's called The Apology of Al-Hindi. And here it is. What is it? Heavy penalties were threatened against the disobedience. All the leaves they could secure were shredded and boiled in vinegar till they were sodden. Until they were sodden, nothing remained, and not even the smallest fragment that could be deciphered. That is very dishonest. Okay? That is very dishonest. Now, if you search up Al-Hindi, mathematician, right? What comes up, right? Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ishaq Abu Sa'id Al-Hindi was an Arab Muslim polymath active as a philosopher, mathematician, physician, and music theorist. Al-Hindi was one of the first Islamic peripatetic philosophers and is hailed as the father of Arab philosophy. Okay? Now, when we search up Al-Hindi, Christian, this is what we get. Apology of Al-Hindi. Okay, and this is actually fantastic, so I actually explained that. So there's two Al-Hindis, yeah? Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ishaq Al-Hindi, which is the Muslim philosopher and mathematician. Abd al-Masih ibn Ishaq Al-Hindi, a Christian author. Apology of the Al-Hindi, which is, if we look again, right? This quote is from the Apology of Al-Hindi. Dialogue format presents a conversation between a Muslim and a Christian audience written for a Christian audience within the Islamic world. Likely written in Baghdad in 820, right? So Al-Hindi, from my understanding, he's a Christian and he hates Muslim. He makes a lot of false claims, Muslims have, Jewish. The Qur'an was made by priests and Jews, right? In his time, and so on and so forth. Like he made a lot of false claims that have no basis in any evidence, right? So him using his quote and writing down it's by the philosopher and mathematician, which is the Muslim Al-Hindi, right, is very dishonest. It's either very dishonest, it's him purposely lying, or he doesn't even know what he's talking about.
The disobedient, all the leaves they could secure were shredded and boiled in vinegar. On the recitation. Said Ubay ibn Ka'b, who was one of the immediate companions of Muhammad, said, Umar said, Ubay was the best of us in the recitation of the Quran, yet we leave some of what he recites. So he's one of the best reciters, but they're leaving out some of what he recites, what he's remembered from the Prophet Muhammad reciting. But Ubay says, I have taken it from the mouth of Allah's messenger and I will not leave it for anything whatever. And we actually have disagreements with individuals like Ubay ibn Ka'b, of individuals who had entire chapters that Uthman did not include. And so there's a little bit of a battle. In fact, if you read between the lines in the Hadith, it appears that a few of these people, potentially Ubay himself, lost their lives because of their refusal to give up their copies of the Quran that they had recorded, as Ubay says here, taken from the mouth of Muhammad himself.
He is essentially saying that, right, okay, that Ubay and the other Sahabas, they lost their life because they refused to give, their mushafs, right? Or their, whatever, right? Now, so firstly, he said chapters and verses. What are you talking about? Like, seriously, what rubbish are you? What evidence do you have? You have no evidence. You have you are just speaking out of ignorance. Like, you're just being ignorant. You have no evidence. You have nothing to prove what you just said. You're making false claims. So for the people who don't know, right? So on this hadith is when Uthman did his Uthmanic Codex, right? He decided to use the Qirā'āt of Zayd ibn Thabit. So he did not want to use the Qirā'āt of Ubay. So again, that's a different dialect, different Qirā'ats, right? So if you want to standardize a text, they chose, there was a consensus and they chose, Zayd ibn Thabit. And that's the Qirā'at they wanted to go with, there was different reasons, or whatever. But that's the one they chose. So if they chose a Qirā'ah, which is Zayd ibn Thabit, why should they go for Ubay? Why? And if that's the case, why don't they add three different Qirā'ahs? Why not four? They chose one and they only wanted to add one, right? Which is Zayd ibn Thabit, right? So that's what this hadith is talking about, right? It's not talking about, different Qur'ans, different chapters, different verses. And frankly, you made the claim. What is the evidence? You're really relying on your Christian audience, like they just, they're loving this. They're like, oh my God, Wess Huff, But no, this is like, you have no evidence to back up your claims. You are making false claims. You are you don't even know your history. You're confusing Umar ibn Umar as being the brother of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You use weak hadiths. You are using Al-Kindis and making it and claiming that that's the Muslim Al-Kindis, because you said he's the you wrote philosopher and mathematician, when that's not the case. The Christian Al-Kindis is not a Muslim or a philosopher. Use the quote from Al-Kindis, the Christian one, in his book, The Apology of Al-Kindis, right? And gave it to the Muslim one. So you are all over the place. You're all over the place. I don't know if Google is your best friend or something, but you need to get your act together.
Refusal to give up their copies of the Quran that they have.
Oh yeah, and Ubay potentially lost his life. He didn't. No one killed him.
And the reality of this is that it allows scholars, and this is why guys like Fred Donner say what he says, very little confidence to be able to trace the original text back, because you have to trust that Uthman got it right. And a lot of the Qur'an, a lot of Muhammad's own immediate followers said Uthman did not get it right.
Where's the evidence?
And so,
where's the evidence? Show us the evidence. Are we just gonna make false claims? Are we gonna make things up on the spot? And secondly, he said that he just compared the freely transmitted text with the controlled text. Any sensible human being, right, scholar or otherwise, and I will tell you guys this, there is a consensus, he's lying. There is a consensus on any theologian, everyone with a brain would agree, right, that the Quran is more preserved than the Old Testament. The Quran has not been edited. The Bible has been edited. We have evidence of the Bible being edited. Now he argues that his whole shebak, right? His whole argument is okay, we have the manuscript, so we can remove what's false, what's been added, and we can put, and keep what's true. But my friend, you know what? It took you guys 2,000 years to figure out that puzzle. That's not a reliable method. That is nonsense. Right? While on the other hand, on the Quran, you have no evidence of such things. Find it, bring it, show it. I want to see it. I actually would love to see any kind of evidence, right? But yeah, let's continue. And then he said, oh, hold on. And he said the Sahaba said this is not the same Quran we recited. Where's the evidence? I want to see the evidence.
Oh, we have the Hadith themselves, the Sahih Hadith, the reliable Hadith.
Evidence.
Even recording individuals who were immediate companions of Muhammad, declaring Uthman's text is not what they heard from Muhammad. But Uthman's text, or a version of it, a 1924 Egyptian printing of the Huff's version of it, is what modern Muslims read today. It is. There's no debate about that. And so the problem with that is that there is very little to no transparency and very little confidence that we have what originally came from Muhammad's mouth.
But we literally have the Birmingham manuscript, and we also got the Sana'a manuscript, dating to early 7th century to late 8th century, potentially to even the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? The earliest manuscript you guys have is 200, 300 years after Jesus. Not only that, there was thousands, I don't want to say thousands, but there was hundreds of different Bibles, different Christians who believe different things. I want to know who really has more confidence. I don't know where he's getting these claims. He's these are very weak arguments, very, very weak arguments. At least I'm bringing evidence, to my claims.
If you look at a Greek New Testament, so this on the screen.
Again, he makes the same claim. I don't want to stay on this too long. It's the same thing. He's like, we're not hiding anything. You can see it. Yeah, we know we can see it. That's why we love that. I love that about you guys, But the truth is, my friend Wess Huff, it's not that you guys don't hide it. There's thousands of, well, let's not say 1,000, but there's a lot of textual criticism on the Bible. There is nothing you guys can hide. That is the more accurate term, the Bible has been destroyed, it has been dismantled, right? Contradictions, editing, verses of trinities that shouldn't be there, right? The adulterous verse, the ending of Mark. Where's he? Come on. What are we doing? Stop this nonsense.
What does this mean? The conclusion of almost every Islamic scholar in the West who analyzes this information is the less on, not in spite of the evidence, but because of it. And the Qur'an has much this accurately. I think what it means is that we can have confidence in the text of the New Testament, not in spite of the evidence, but because of it. And the Qur'an has much, much less on its side in terms of multifocality and tenacity and therefore reliability as a whole. This is the conclusion of almost every Islamic scholar in the West who analyzes this information.
Evidence. Can we get evidence to this, I don't think there's any, I would absolutely argue the opposite. Majority of Western scholars would agree that the Quran is more preserved than the Bible, and Muslims done a way better job to make sure that there's no editing, no fabrications, no contradictions in their book than than the Christians. Now, whether you want to say it because Muslims controlled it or whatever, I don't really care of that claim, to be honest with you. We have a preserved book, you guys don't, and you can twist it and turn it as much as you like, but that's the truth.
Why? Because to Canterbury to have is one of what the original is have low in number of times. The Quran has human in terms of the fact that what is read today is a 1920s printing, which was not.
Now, okay, so he makes the claim that Quran has history. So the Muslims. If just read our tradition, my friend, read our tradition. We have already told you guys our history. We already told you how the Quran was preserved. We explained it to you guys, how the standardization of the Quran happened. We explained the history, The idea that now that that Western scholars discovered that the Quran has history is false, It's just lack of knowledge or understanding of the Islamic history. We acknowledge the history and we know the history, and there's nothing wrong. Nothing in our history, the Quranic history, disapproves the Quran. The Quran has human fingerprints all over it. That's what? And the Bible doesn't? What? Oh my God, this guy, he's crazy. The Quran transmission compared with the New, and the third claim he makes is the Quran transmission compared with the New Testament reveals that one is ultimately far more reliable. Which is the Quran. And
the Quranic transmission compared with the New Testament reveals that one is ultimately far. So I want to do. I have on the screen, unfortunately, I was trying to get pictures of the manuscripts themselves, but if you're able to trace them down, the standard 1924 text and translation of Surah 3, Ayah 158 says, whether you die or are martyred.
So here's the thing. He used this verse, right? So he used this verse, which says, like, apparently in the Surah Ali Imran standard 1924 text in translation, it says, whether you die or martyred, all of you will be gathered before Allah. And then another one, whether you die or martyred, all of you will not be gathered before Allah. Surah Al Imran, Quran manuscript 328, Great Paris manuscript, right? Now, here's the thing. My question to you, my friend, all right? Did you cherry pick this verse? That's the first verse. Now, what did all the other manuscripts say? Okay, did you did the Sanaa manuscript have this? Did the Birmingham manuscript have this? Now, I know the Birmingham manuscript is not a full text. The Sanaa is a much complete text, the manuscript than the Birmingham manuscript. But when I couldn't find it, honestly, and the ones I could find, I couldn't read, if I'm being honest with you guys. So I asked ChatGPT for this one, and it says no known classical manuscripts support this variation. The Great Papyrus manuscript is a partial manuscript and does not contain all of the surahs of Al Imran, according to academic research. The relevant foliage do not show this verse, let alone a version with ma instead of la. Not published Quranic paleography scholars has confirmed the existence of a ma variant at, the Papyrus manuscript. The variant appearing to be misreading or forgery. There is no authentic early Quranic manuscript that reads Ma illa Allahi tuhsharun. Such a phrase is both linguistically awkward and theologically contradictory. In Arabic grammar, saying Ma illa Allahi tuhsharun, you will not be gathered to Allah, is not idiomatic and read like a synatic error. The standard reading is supported by all canonical Qirā'āt, including Hafs, Warsh, and others. All Qirā'āt agree on the reading. All 10 canonical Qirā'āt agree on.
وَلَئِن مُتُّمْ أَوْ قُتِلْتُمْ لَإِلَى اللَّهِ تُحْشَرُونَ.
Again, I apologize. I couldn't find it myself, and the ones that I could find, I just couldn't read. So it was a very hard task for me. So I just asked ChatGPT on this one. But going based on everything he has done, all the based off everything he has done, all the fake claims, all the lies he made, example, Al-Kindis, not knowing that Ibn Umar is not the brother of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and so on and so forth. I wouldn't put this past him. Now, again, I don't have evidence to prove this claim. I use ChatGPT. I wouldn't even use this as an evidence. But again, one thing I know for a fact is that if this manuscript has it, the other manuscripts wouldn't. Okay, now in the rest of the video, he just uses the Muslim dilemma argument, which has been debunked 1,000 of times. So I don't really need to debunk that claim. You guys can watch videos on that. There's thousands of videos on that. It's a weak argument. If I'm being honest, it's a pathetic Christian argument. But yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. So if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Inshallah, I'll be making more videos. Let me know what I did right, if I got anything wrong, so I can, fix it up. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum.